I said, why do you think I'm having such a tough year? Straight answer, he didn't have to think about it. He said, you're trying to be Jeff. Yes, you can learn some things from Jeff, but if you don't put your own spin to this, you're going to be really transactional. You're going to win every now and then. You're going to fail a whole lot more than you succeed. And at the end of the day, if you're on my team, I kind of want to get to know you, Carlos.
This is the Medical Sales Accelerator Podcast, featuring tips from top performers, delivered like a conversation over cocktails. Listen in to glean wisdom from the best of the best and accelerate your results for years to come. Now, here are your hosts, Zed Williamson and Clark Wiederhold.
Welcome to the Medical Sales Accelerator Podcast. This podcast is for you if you care about growth. Do you want to accelerate your numbers? Do you want to grow your market or market share? Then that's what this podcast is here for.
My name is Clark Wiederhold. I'm Chief Sales Officer for Trackable Med.
I'm Zed Williamson, CEO of Trackable Med.
VAT committees, purchasing agents, professional buyers, these are all roadblocks we run into in the field. What do you do when you get there, and what does that mean? How do we quickly overcome those obstacles?
It's a good question, and it's why we have our guest today, who we're very excited to have here. This is Carlos Calix, currently serves as Assistant Vice President of Business Development at Ochsner Health System. Prior to joining Ochsner, Carlos spent many years in the medtech space as a high-performing sales rep and sales leader. With this experience working for a startup, major medtech organizations, as well as for a healthcare system, Carlos brings unique perspective to the industry and provider network relationship. Welcome.
Zed, Clark, thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. You have a lot on your plate, so we appreciate you carving out some time to dive into this conversation. Spending a lot of time in medtech on the commercial side of the business, interacting with physicians, healthcare networks, the professional buyers, VAT committees. Now sitting on the other side of the table, what surprised you the most after joining Integrated Health Network?
You know, Clark, it has been a learning experience, right? And as you guys indicated, spending many, many years with different companies, loving my time in the device world, and always working to get into hospitals and dealing with all the individuals that you just talked about, the different committees, the different roadblocks and obstacles, and how do you get something on the shelf? How do you get it into a physician's hands? And how do you ultimately help patients with these devices that we all get very passionate about? It was interesting how much I learned in the first few months sitting on the other side and working for the hospital. And it was interesting. I wish I would have learned and known a lot about this, 20 years ago, right? And just when you think you know it all, you're quickly shown a window into all the things you wish you would have known. And not saying I have a full picture, but I have had an interesting vantage point over the past couple of years, seeing the different progressions within the hospital, decision-making processes within a hospital, and also realizing something very basic that I think will hit home with everyone listening here. In the med device world, my days with Boston Scientific and Medtronic and all these folks, what did we all have in common? We all had goals. I had a monthly goal. I had a quarterly goal. I had a yearly goal. I'm trying to maximize my commissions. I'm trying to maximize my growth. I want to be ranked right up there with my colleagues. And if anything, I want them to be close to me, but I want to be a step ahead of them. The interesting thing to me was that within the hospital, every department has a goal. They all have metrics. They all have things they need to report on monthly to track how they're doing. Then they report out quarterly. Then they report out yearly. There was way more similarities in how individuals within a hospital were approaching their business to the way we did when we were in med device. They have goals. We have goals. And I wish I would have had a better understanding of that as I was approaching different systems and different clinics over the years, because if I'm not aligned with the hospital's goals or the department's goals, and I don't take time to find that out, the chances of my success were one of two things: luck, or they were never going to happen. So that's some of my initial learnings here working for a hospital system.
Sure. Really interesting, right? Not that different from a goal and a metric perspective. So you mentioned you wish you knew some of these things 15, 20 years ago, right? It would have made your world a lot easier. What are a couple of specifics that come to the front of your mind, that a couple of specific things you would do differently knowing what you know now? Maybe as a field rep, right? Individual contributor, as well as a sales leader with a team.
Sure. I depending on where your specialty, resides within the hospital, if you're working in the cath lab, if you're working in the endoscopy lab for GI, it applies to all of these spots in the hospital. I know I would have taken more time. I think I did it a little bit, but I would have spent more time working with that nurse manager, the lab manager, understanding probably now that I have a better viewpoint of it, the 37 items they have on their whiteboard that they're trying to put together to get to the end of the year. No, they know that they can't achieve them all. They have to narrow the list down and then insert Carlos walking into that lab with my own ideas. I know I got a lot of smiles along the way over my years, but a lot of them, now that I look back, would probably, he never once asked me what I had on my plate, what I was trying to accomplish within the next 30 days. He just asked me for a trial. He has no idea of the things I have on my plate for the next 3 weeks, much less corralling all my physicians, corralling all my nurses. He's asking me to train. It sounds nice. He sounds helpful. But oh my goodness, this is the last thing in the world I have time for. And I think taking a step back, and that's when I'm talking about taking a breath before you launch a product or insert next quarter strategy, and getting to know these customers better. What are they doing? It sounds so basic. I tell you, but I missed it most of the time in my career. And it's not rocket science, but unless you understand what that other person on the other side of the table has on their mind, has on their shoulders, has the next meeting to discuss, you're shooting in the wind.
I think sometimes that creates a pushback from them that as salespeople, we take almost personally, or they don't see the real vision. So then we as salespeople tend to avoid those kind of interactions where instead of realizing, gosh, all I need to do is connect with them, understand what their goals and pains are, I go, oh, well, screw that place. They don't get it. And I'm going to spend my time somewhere that's easier to get in.
Absolutely. And it's easy for me to say these things, right? Sales are sales. We all need to get on the scoreboard. I get all of that. Lived it. Trust me, I lived it, as we all have. But I think if we go through our territories, thinking of my time, and hospital one, if I have this conversation with, and that lab manager has tremendous weight on them, it's not the right time for a trial. And I tell them that, and I share that with them. I came in here today with the hopes that we're launching this new product, we're launching this new initiative. My hope was to maybe have you as one of the first places we can start this with. I can see today that's going to be extremely difficult and really not fair in this moment. But I'd love to revisit it next quarter. It seems like you can accomplish some of these things, get them off your plate. And now all of a sudden I'm working with that person, right? And then back to my goals, I move to the next hospital, right? And maybe they're in a different place in the year. And maybe they have time for this. Maybe you've got a really excited physician who is willing to trial this next week. I now haven't wasted my time at hospital A trying to ram, the old square peg in the round hole. And I find a system, a hospital, a lab, a physician, whatever it might be, that is ready to go today. I get on that leaderboard faster, right? I expose our devices to help patients quicker in the right place. But it all goes back to understanding all the things that are on your customer's plate.
I like to think of it sometimes in sales, we think it's adversarial, me versus you, I win or you win. And what you're talking about sounds like to me, instead of being across the table from them, you're coming over, you're putting your arm around them, you're shoulder to shoulder, working on the same end goal that allows you to build that deeper relationship. They're more trusting and gives you that entry point later in time, as opposed to just feeling like you're banging your head against the wall.
I'd agree with that. And I think there are times, I know I did it, created a very adversarial conversation, to take your words. It was extremely one way. And probably the most overused word out there in sales is partnership or collaboration, insert synonym. Because for the most time, when we create that and throw out that really pretty sounding word, it is one way. And I think if you start, with the example, you just brought all this back up, but if you start with that conversation where it is two-way, and they're helping you build the timeline of when you can do the trial, when you can grab the physician's attention, bring them all together, educate and train. If you help them build that strategy with you, then you feel way more comfortable using those fancy collaboration partnership words. And I think that really, it opens that door for trust, that if I come in there and it's one way, that door is slammed shut or very, very much closed.
It sounds like you're really talking about being empathetic, right, to all of the potential stakeholders within your ecosystem of that healthcare network. But that's different than being sympathetic, right? Empathetic is understanding. It's not necessarily being, it's not agreeing or sympathizing with all the things. It's just recognizing them, pointing them out. Carlos, listening to you, I remember having the revelation that my widget or my sales goal, the thing I was trying to accomplish at the time, wasn't the most important thing for my customer. It was the most important thing in my world. It was one of 50 to 100 initiatives or plates that a potential customer or a stakeholder was spinning at the time. That vantage point, that lens really shifted the way I would look at the sales process. Sounds like you're basically describing that. Have some emotional intelligence to understand that.
What you're trying to do is walk out with a tremendous amount of information. So then you as a sales professional, you as a company, you as a manager, analyzing all of this with your team, can make informed decisions.
Exactly.
And having your colleagues, meaning hospitals, labs, build the strategy with you, I found much greater success later on in my sales career when I started to take that approach. And I know you did as well. So it's information, and having more pieces of that puzzle, whatever analogy you want to use, helps you make better decisions, which ultimately will get you on that leaderboard, will get that first PO, and will have you leading the next monthly huddle with your team, sharing your success, right? Because again, sales, we got to do all that stuff, right?
Right.
Be completely, Pollyannic about our approach. We do need to get a PO, right? Like that is the end of it all. Or they'll find someone else to grab the PO. But I think you can accomplish all of that. I think you can accomplish more if you take the time to gather more information.
Yeah, the information also, it's information for information's sake doesn't really do us a lot of good, right? What it does is it gives you the perspective or the position to do things that help that behavior change from your customer standpoint. And when you brought that up, it reminded me of something that we put together. It's available for free for anybody. The audience, you can go to medicalsalesaccelerator.com, enter in your email, and download the Behavior Change Blueprint. This is something that takes some very specific, actionable approaches to communication, and you can put them into practice tomorrow. It's the Behavior Change Blueprint. Be really interested to get your feedback on it at medicalsalesaccelerator.com. And speaking of behavior change, there are reps in the field right now listening to this going, I don't know, man, having to worry about what that lab manager cares about and all this. Well, let's think of the person who absolutely is the opposite of this approach. What would you tell them to do just to get started to change their mindset? What's the first step for them to move into an approach of like what you're talking about?
It's a hard question, right? Because if we're going to be frank, which we should be on this podcast, if I'm the manager or the region manager or the director, and I'm speaking to someone on my team who has that, a different approach than what I'm describing, and they're having success that year, there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to change that behavior.
It's a really good point.
Now, what we all have seen and realized over our careers is those people that are a little bit more transactional in their victories will have peaks and valleys. We've all seen it, right? That colleague of ours that is on Peak Club, top of the world, broke a new record. They start the next 2 months of the following year dead last, the bottom quadrant, and their sales are just up, down. Hero 1 month, zero the next month. And then people start looking for jobs. They job hop. Oh my, it's a real thing. But if you catch them on that year where their trajectory is just through the roof, there's nothing you're going to say that's going to change that approach. So I think as leadership, we need to understand, the entire picture before we try to change behaviors. And not that you wait for people to be in their weak spots, but I think having conversations with long-term success in a territory, long-term career success that is consistent, which is, number one, I believe, good for the individual, right? I don't want to feel crummy next year. I want to feel really good this year. I want to feel really good next year about my impact and what I do. And then if you really think about it from a company's perspective, I want an employee in Greater New Orleans that's profitable for my company year after year after year. And so if you've got someone on that high, they're heading to Peak Club, but they do it their own way or a different way than what we're discussing, I think maybe talking about it as a consistency year over year, introducing concepts, maybe pointing out some times where more information could have been gathered than the quick PO. It's going to be a longer progression, a longer route to change than someone who may be hitting that B minus, right? Just getting by, just hitting their targets, just coming in last day of the month over their quota. I think that person, along with those who are struggling, are going to have a more of an appetite to accept some of this change.
What I like about that is you're applying the same model that you're suggesting to actually making it work for the team, right? So you were talking about it's important to understand where someone else is and what matters to them and adjust your strategy to fit with that. And you just said the same thing about your sales team. The person who's crushing it, winning it, hitting home runs every day, are you really going to change their behavior? But if you strategically think about the team members who you can truly help and put them on a path that's not so up and down, you could blindfold yourself, swing a baseball bat enough times, you might hit a home run. And that's not a comfortable place to be from a certainty standpoint. So I really like that you answered my question with the same answer that you're saying would help success, which is just a sign that it's something that you've ingrained into your behavior, which is awesome.
We're recording this at a time where we're, as a country, coming out of a lot of unprecedented disruption within the healthcare market specifically, right? Post-COVID timeframe. You've got companies trying to re-engage systems on deals that may have been in a pipeline. Everybody's trying to get their business back in a healthy standing, the healthcare systems included, right? The integrated health networks. How should somebody approach an integrated health network today that might be different from 9 months ago?
I think back to April when almost every other day you saw this laying off of physicians across the country from different health systems. And we were trying to plan for things that we didn't know. So I think, again, understanding your customer, if you're talking to an IDN or a health system that has had the worst financial 6 months of their existence and wanting to re-engage because you're trying to get something across the line that might have a sticker price that even in normal days is a big number, let's face it, it's going to be extremely difficult. There are things that we do fantastically as a med device industry, and we become, because of the great engineers and minds that work in the med device industry, we've become integral in the basic running of labs, right, or ORs. They almost can't do the procedure without the devices that we have trained them on, exposed them to, and helping their patients with. So if they want to get those same types of patients back, help those patients in the community, and our devices are part of that, then that's a good place to be.
There's not too many times where people get to have success in roles that end up being on both sides of the coin. You're getting to see that in this organization that is thinking strategy first before just banging their head against the wall. You came from an industry that is a mix of the two, depending on the personality type, right? What was the biggest aha moment you've had since being at Ochsner, looking at it from the medtech mindset that you came from? What was the holy moly? And it might be a recognition of something that was being done accidentally that created success or something like that.
Yeah, I think, and this one, my answer, I think, was going to even further the answer to what Clark just asked. And so there was a good and a bad in my recognition here, even a couple of years ago. The good was that the missions and the goals were very similar. We wanted to help people.
Yeah.
Right? We wanted better health for people. We wanted better outcomes for people. The whole trend towards minimally invasive. There is a tremendous match with hospital goals, their outcomes, and what the med device industry is also shooting for. That's really good. I think the aha moment when I started to see the inner workings is back to the point of we all have goals and metrics. And how do you help whoever is managing your contracts, right? If you have a contract with a lab, a contract with the hospital, how do you maximize that contract? Knowing that supply chain also has goals. That one was an aha moment to me. Just never thought about it that way. Supply chain has goals and metrics. And like everyone, especially this year, their job is going to be to consolidate. Their job is going to be to find savings any way they can. Certainly not at the expense of a patient, but there's certainly a lot of fluff in there that they can carve out. And they're looking every hour of every day, and they're looking hard. And supply chain employs a lot of people. And so if there's a way to work with supply chain to maybe bring in the next generation product, maybe bring in the next launch, even in this weird time that we're in, but achieve those goals, right? Like if I think tactically, can my new device consolidate 2 or 3 of a competitor? Can my new device maybe provide some savings because of a bundling situation? Whatever tactic your company allows you to kind of cobble together, keeping in mind that supply chain person, whoever is signing off on that PO, is assigned to that lab and is assigned to all the contracts in that lab. You can make their job a little easier. You can save them some money, or consolidate things for them to make it easier to work with you. You're less vulnerable, and your probability of growing in that lab start to go up. None of that is completely easy, right? At all. And it takes a lot of thought, it takes a lot of conversations. Again, it goes back to understanding that lab and what they're trying to accomplish that month, quarter, that year. But I found the only time I ever got into those conversations is when I slowed down and started asking all of these types of questions. And I put a bigger fence around my business when I did it.
So Carlos, somebody's following your advice, and they're walking down the trail of everybody that impacts a potential deal for them, right? and they found their supply chain personnel. What questions do you ask when feedback they get is, well, I just need your best price. I need you to save me money. That's always the initial reaction you get. How do you come back, and what questions do you ask to get to the true, uncover the true why behind what they really need?
I would say that we've all, again, Clark, you've had tremendous success, so you've gotten to that table, right? And getting, just because you're there mentally, that you're trying to get all the right people together, doesn't mean the supply chain person is,
sure,
or the individual physician, or the individual lab manager. So you got to spend a little bit of time, it might be a minute or two, of helping that person understand that the easy play here is to give you a lower price or the next tier so that they can assume 4 or 5% savings. That's the easy play. And that, again, is transactional. It's short term. Next year, you're going to have the same problems. You're going to have the same pressures on you and supply chain to find another 5 to 7%. We're going to repeat the cycle next year. Or you propose to them and get it. What I would offer is a short-term solution for this year, a walk towards next year, and a walk even to 36 months out. And help me build that, Mr. Supply Chain, Miss Supply Chain, Miss person who handles all of these contracts. How many of the contracts within, let's just take GI, are having this conversation with you, are trying to understand what you're trying to accomplish this year, and trying to build a map where you don't have to do this every 12 months. That's what I want to do. So I get it. Transactional price, we can certainly talk about that. But let's make the next 18 months really simple for us and you in GI. I'd go down that path, right? And try to get them, again, you got to get them to shift their mindset. They might not be thinking like us, but if you can get them to think of, I don't want to do this again next year. Here's one thing that I did wrong early on in my career. I would get these little deals done and I'd never check back in, almost afraid of the results. Am I really providing them 5 to 7% savings?
Right.
I don't know. My economics person at my headquarters said it would. But why don't we sit back and see if we're really pointing into the direction that we both agreed upon at the beginning? And that's going to take us examining this every few months and tweaking things along the way. And oh, by the way, as we're tweaking, right, Sales 101, we can introduce new ideas, new devices, new products, new launches, these kinds of things. And gosh, I guess we're all talking about the same thing. Now I'm building a relationship with the person who's handling my contract.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What I love so much about that is in sales, sometimes salespeople feel like they need to be the hero. They need to come in and be the one. And what this approach is doing is you're making the supply chain person the hero, and you're just their guide. And that is a powerful place to be from a behavior change standpoint, from a deep relationship standpoint. You're backing off, letting them get the spotlight of the win, but you're a required part of the win. You're the little guy with the backpack of weapons next to them, yes, as they tackle their supply chain. And that is an awesome place to be.
It's an approach, right? We've got choices. We can make a lot of approaches to these big systems. It's an approach. And I think if I look around of my colleagues, I've been around for a couple of years and my grays are starting to show, but I look at the Clarks of the world. I look at, some of my other colleagues who aren't on here right now. They all seem to take a version of this approach. And so what I took over the years was an approach that I saw the successful people around me taking, and then I put some Carlos tweaks to it. No more complicated than that. And I remember, this is, the old boring analogies, but early on in my career, I was that C player, just getting over quota, and a few of the times not getting over there. And we had these like one-on-one 360s, whatever you want to call them these days. And I was in my early 20s, And I said, Rusty Becks, my manager back then, love him to this day. I said, why do you think I'm having such a tough year? Straight answer, he didn't have to think about it. He said, you're trying to be Jeff, one of my teammates. Now, Jeff, total different personality than me, bigger than life, takes the oxygen out of every room he walks into. He owned himself. Like, he knew who he was, and he was maximizing it. He's like, we don't really know who the real Carlos is yet. Yes, you can learn some things from Jeff, but if you don't put your own spin to this and your own true self come out in these relationships you're trying to build, you're going to be really transactional. You're going to win every now and then. You're going to fail a whole lot more than you succeed. And at the end of the day, if you're on my team, I kind of want to get to know you, Carlos. Never forget that conversation. I know where we were. I remember it was in the afternoon. I had taken him on a milk run, right? All my best customers. And I was on cloud nine. I thought he was going to high five me. And he gave me a nice cold glass of water over my head. He said, quit trying to be Jack. So in the midst of all of these things, you got to be yourself. You got to personalize any of these approaches. But I'll never forget that conversation with Rusty.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It's got to be authentic. You got to put it in, your own version, so it's natural for you.
There are people avoiding the approach you're talking about because they have the information they have. And this is what gets that little nugget. And maybe the person who's crushing it, just like you said, isn't going to take advantage. But maybe the person who's going, you know what, maybe this is kind of the reinventing of myself. And maybe it's not change 100% to 100%, but let me go after this target this way, get real about it, get it done, and see, what the outcome is.
I agree. Doing nothing is pretty easy.
Yep.
My results are average. I'm still getting paid. It's the much easier path. It's not, change is not an easy thing, but the more we talk about it, the more people see, the Clark sitting next to them, getting all the praise and leading all these things. Hopefully it spins them to want to do something, even like you said, 10% different than they did before. Yeah, but it's truthful. I've been lucky. I've got like 2 or 3 people over the years that have been just giving in their time with me and opening up how they built, their little empires that they built, and just try to emulate them. That's all.
Don't recreate the wheel. You've got peers, whether it's in marketing, on the sales side, in management and leadership, that are doing really good things. They're saying really good things. Take that, personalize it, use the verbiage, the tactics, but make it your own. And when I started doing that, when I challenged myself to not look past the real East Coast flair person in that particular sales force, but take what they were doing and what was working and then build it into my style, I started to have much, much more success within conversations, and the lagging result, the numbers just came with that.
Not all of us have the mentor that is going to dump that glass of cold water over your head.
Yeah.
And what you found out that day is extraordinarily powerful. And this is kind of a crazy offer, but for anyone out there that is curious, are you being you? If you're asking yourself, am I acting different? Am I trying to be someone else? Am I really using who my nature is the best I can be? Go to medicalsalesaccelerator.com. Submit a message to us just asking, am I me? And what we'll do, no cost, this is kind of a one-time, just crazy idea I have right now. We'll give you an assessment that is predictive index, which is a behavioral assessment, and it's going to show you who your nature is and who you think you have to be right now. And the goal in life is to make those things the same. And it's nice to see it on paper if you're aligned, or you'll find out exactly where you may be a little misaligned with who you are and who you're trying to be. So go to medicalsalesaccelerator.com, send us a message just asking, am I me? And we'll send you a link to do that assessment at no charge.
Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insight is invaluable. You bring a very unique perspective. We appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you both for the invitation. It's been this hour has flown by, and thank you for having me here. Very humbled by it. So Zed, Clark, thank you both.
We appreciate it. You've been listening to the Medical Sales Accelerator podcast. Go to medicalsalesaccelerator.com. You can sign up for the newsletter where you get access to special information. You can download the behavior change blueprint, and you can also find out about upcoming guests and make suggestions for guests that you'd like to hear from. Thanks for listening.